Hi everyone, my name is Pio Pamungkas, and today I'm reviewing Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. FYI, I actually read this book back in high school. I read this book for my English class, but to be honest, at that time I did not fully understand how relevant it was. Recently, I reread it again for this unit, and I feel like I don't know, it hits me differently now, especially because I can relate it more to organizational behavior and real life situations. All right, about this book. This book is actually about how we think, how we make decisions, and why we are not always as rational as we like to believe. And honestly, that is why I think it's really relevant for organizational behavior students. In workplaces, people are constantly making decisions, judging others, solving problems, and reacting under pressure. So, understanding how our thing work is actually pretty important. What makes this book interesting is that it does not just talk about thinking in a theoretical way. It shows how people make real mistakes in everyday life, even when they are smart, experienced, or confident. And when I reread it, I realize I have actually made some of these mistakes myself, especially when making quick decisions or assuming I was right without really thinking it through. That is why I think this book matters for students like us. Because organizational behavior is not just about some organizations, it is about people. And people are messy. We do not always think carefully, and we definitely do not always behave logically. One of the biggest ideas in the book is the difference between System 1 and System 2 thinking. Let me explain it to you. System 1 is fast, automatic, and intuitive. It is the kind of thinking we use when we react quickly without really stopping to think. You must be in the situation where you need to solve a problem and then you react quickly without really thinking it through. Well, that's called System 1. System 2 is slower and more deliberate. Before reading this book, I kind of thought that people made decisions is pretty logical. But Kahneman, the author, makes it clear that a lot of our decisions actually come from quick instinct, not careful reasoning. It's weird, right? And that can be a problem, especially at work where quick judgment can sometimes lead to bad choices. I think this idea is really useful for organizational behavior because in organizations, people do not always have time to fully analyze everything. Sometimes they have to respond fast, but the problem is that fast thinking can be useful in simple situations, while in more serious situations, it can lead to mistakes. Another important idea is cognitive bias. This is where the book gets really interesting because it shows that our judgment is often influenced by our hidden mental shortcuts. Things like overconfidence and maybe encoding can shape the way we think without us even noticing. I give you an example. If the first number or opinion here seems convincing, we may end up giving it way too much weight. Or we might think we know more than we actually do. What I found useful is that this book makes bias feel real, not just like an academic concept. It shows that even when people believe they are being objective, their judgment can still be shaped by things they are not fully aware of. That is a big deal in organizational behavior. Because a lot of workplace issues come from people thinking they are being fair, when actually they are just being influenced by hidden assumptions. The third idea that stood out to me is overconfidence. The book explains that people often think they are more right than they really are, and they underestimate risks. Maybe for you that sounds simple, but it actually has a serious consequences. In leadership, for example, someone who is too confident may make fast decisions without checking the facts properly. I also think this is especially relevant in student life too. Sometimes in group work, one person is super sure about their answer and everyone else just goes along with it. But being confident does not always mean being right. That is why this idea is powerful because it applies not only to managers and leaders, but also students, teams, and basically everyone around the world. There are also a couple of things I would critique in the book. The first one is that the book kind of assumes that once you know about bias, you will automatically get better at avoiding it. But in real life, that is not always true. So I think a better approach would be to pair awareness with actual systems that help people make better decisions. Things like getting feedback, slowing down important decisions, or maybe using more structured processes will make the ideas more practical. The second thing I would critique is that the book focuses a lot on general human thinking, but it does not always go deep enough into individual differences. So while the book gives a very strong general framework, I think it will be even better if it explained more clearly why some people are more likely to stop and analyze. That will make it more useful for organizational behavior. Of course, this matters because in real workplaces, people are not just thinking machines. They have different backgrounds, different values, and different personalities. So, when we talk about decision making, it's not enough to say everyone uses the same system in the same way. That is where I think the book could be a bit more balanced. Based on the book, I have three practical pieces of advice for organizational behavior students. First, slow down before making important decisions. Take a chill pill, relax. Even a short pause can help you move from automatic thinking to more careful thinking. The small pause is very important and it can make a big difference. Let me show you. I know when you speak in public, you often said something like that. Rather than that, you can try pausing. Take for a sec, take a deep breath, and continue. It will definitely sound better, trust me. Second, question your first impression. Ask yourself, am I actually judging this based on evidence? Or am I just reacting too quickly? That one question can help you catch a lot of bias before it becomes a problem. Third, try to build self awareness around your thinking patterns. If you know that you tend to overconfident, or if you know you usually stick with the first idea you hear, then you can work on that. I think these are really practical because they are not just theory, they are habits you can actually start using in study, group work, and eventually in the workplace. And that is what makes the book useful, not just interesting. To wrap up, Thinking Fast and Slow is really valuable book because it reminds us that human thinking is messy, biased, and not always logical. For me, the biggest takeaway is that being aware of how we think is just as important as knowing what to think. And for organizational behavior students, that matters a lot because better thinking leads to better decisions, better teamwork, and better leadership. So, overall, I think this book is not just about psychology, it is about real life, real decisions, and the way people really behave. And that's it for my book review. Thank you for watching.